good reasons why we should increase inheritance tax. So that's taking the road less travelled, because we know from surveys that half the general public actually want to abolish inheritance tax altogether, and many of the rest want to reduce it, not increase it. Perhaps you share those views? Taxes are generally not very popular. Inheritance tax is one of the least popular. So what are my 10 really good reasons? Hopefully I can change your minds if you're one of those people who think we should abolish or reduce it. So my first reason is that I think we need more money for the public purse. We might have very many different ideas about what we would do with that money. Some people might want to use it to reduce the public sector debt, which is running at pretty high levels at the moment. Others might want to put money into the National Health Service or into schools or universities. Other people might want to use the money to reduce poverty, or we could use the money to cut other kinds of taxes like income tax or VAT. There are lots of many different ways we could use the money if we raised inheritance tax. But why do that particularly, to raise the money? Well, at the moment, very few people actually pay inheritance tax. Fewer than 1 in 20 of those that die have inheritance tax levied against their estates. It's a very small proportion of people. We could double this form of taxation, and we would still only tax the wealthiest 10% of the population, leaving the vast majority of us to leave our wealth to our families untaxed entirely. Okay, so I've just said that very few people pay inheritance tax. That's not strictly true, because nobody actually pays inheritance tax. No living body, actually. It's not really an inheritance tax at all. It's an estate tax. The tax is levied against the estate of somebody after they die. I think that's a great tax. Imagine a politician comes up to you at the next election and says, "I've got this really good idea for a tax. It's one you will never have to pay as long as you live." You wouldn't believe that politician. You'd think, no, there must be some catch. But that's inheritance tax. And I think we should increase the amount we will never have to pay as long as we live. Another reason for increasing inheritance tax is actually it's quite a difficult tax to evade. Unlike some other kinds of wealth taxes, where people can hide their wealth in complex offshore accounts. You can't do that with inheritance tax, because if you want to pass your wealth on to someone else, that estate has to be administered formally and legally. And at that point, the tax authorities can come in, check your liability, and make sure the tax is paid. So it's actually quite a good tax in that way. It's a difficult one to evade, and that's another reason I think we should increase it. My fifth reason is that at the moment we tax earned income far more than unearned wealth, and I don't think that seems the right way round. Let me give you an example. Say next year I manage to be incredibly lucky and get a job as a Vice-Chancellor. Obviously not of this university, because we want our Vice-Chancellor to keep going for many, many years. But say another university, I get that job, the top job in a university, Vice-Chancellor. Now the average salary for a Vice-Chancellor at the moment in the UK is £260,000. They work incredibly hard for that money, long hours, lots of pressure, lots of demands, and that's the average pay. Now, if I got that pay, I'd have to pay income tax. And the amount of income tax I'd have to pay is roughly £100,000. So for every 3 hours I'm working as that Vice-Chancellor, one of those hours would effectively be working for the tax authorities. Now, you might think that's a high level of tax, or not, but that's the level of tax I would pay. Now imagine next year I'm also incredibly lucky to find out that I've received an inheritance of, let's say, £260,000 by coincidence, from a long-lost, distant great-uncle that I never even knew I had. So £260,000 comes to me. How much tax is paid on that? Absolutely nothing. The threshold for inheritance tax in the UK at the moment for a single person who leaves wealth is £325,000. Anything up to that point is untaxed. Now, I think that's the wrong way round. I work very hard as a Vice-Chancellor, putting in lots of long hours. I have to pay £100,000 of income tax. I receive this windfall of £260,000 from this long-lost uncle. I've done nothing to earn or deserve that. I get it, and no tax is paid at all. I think we should increase inheritance tax and also change it so it's not an estate tax, but we tax the receipts of capital that people get from it. And I think that would give us a much fairer tax system. My sixth reason for arguing we should increase inheritance tax, I hope I'm bringing you all along on the journey here, is that wealth inequality in the UK is currently extremely high, far higher than income inequality and far higher than people think it is or think it ought to be. Now, at the University of Birmingham, we carried out a survey of the general public through an Ipsos Mori survey, and we asked them about this. We first of all asked them what they thought an ideal distribution of wealth might be. And they said they thought that perhaps some wealth inequality would be a good thing, would be okay. They thought perhaps the top 20%, the white bar here, should own about a third of all wealth, 32%. They thought that the bottom 20%, the red bar here, might own 13% in their ideal distribution of wealth. We then asked them what they thought the actual distribution of wealth was. And they said they thought it was probably more unequal than their ideal. They thought the top 20% probably owned about 39% of all wealth, and the bottom 20% probably owned about 10%. So more unequal than their ideal. What they didn't know was that the actual distribution of wealth in the UK today is far more unequal than what they thought it was, and certainly than what they thought is ideal. The top 20% at the moment own about 62% of all wealth. The bottom 20% actually don't even appear on the chart. They own no wealth at all. And even the next 20% only own 4% of all wealth. And this is a very comprehensive definition of wealth. It includes all kinds of property wealth, personal pension wealth, occupational pension wealth, stocks, shares, savings, gilts, and even personal possessions, cars, the things you have in your home. It's a very comprehensive picture of wealth. It's very unequal. And this is even an underestimate of the inequality because it's based on a survey, the Wealth and Assets Survey. It's a general public survey, very huge samples, 40,000 households, but they don't get to the very richest households. Those households don't open the security gates to let the interviewers in to ask them about their wealth. So inequality of wealth, extremely high, far higher than people think it is or think it ought to be, and inheritance tax can help reduce those inequalities. But perhaps you don't think that those inequalities of wealth are a problem. You might, however, agree with the vast majority of the public that the principle of equality of opportunity is important. The idea that every child should have a fair chance in life, a similar chance to other children, no matter whether they are born to rich or poor parents. This principle is heavily compromised by the fact that some children will inherit far more than others. And again, inheritance tax can help to reduce that problem. Now, while it's true that children, as I've just said, born to wealthy parents have far greater opportunities in life and generally do much better than others, if some people have great expectations in the future of receiving a large inheritance, actually, there's very little incentive for them to work hard or be productive. And as Charles Dickens showed us, great expectations don't necessarily bring out the best in people and can be dangerous. So inheritance tax can help there. My ninth reason is actually two for the price of one, really. If inheritance tax were higher, people would either spend more money on themselves during their lifetime, which presumably would be good for them, or they would give it to their children earlier, which presumably would be good for their children. So again, inheritance tax can help people. Okay, so I've given you 9, I think, really good reasons for why we should increase inheritance tax. I hope I've all convinced you. Anybody not convinced yet? Maybe a few. Okay, a few of you. So what's my last reason? How am I going to convert the remaining few that are not with me on this road less travelled? Well, we know that people aren't necessarily convinced by rational argument. I've given you 9 really good reasons, but actually rational argument only goes so far. And we know from the philosopher David Hume, who said that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. And people believe passionately that they want to leave their wealth to their families. They want to help their families. They're motivated by love of their families. And that's one of the reasons they dislike inheritance tax. Now, I think there's no finer motive than loving your family and wanting to help your family. I have a 17-year-old daughter myself, and I'm concerned about her future. It's very difficult for young people at the moment. If you get to go to university, you take on student loans, then you have to think about getting a job, maybe getting a home. There's lots of challenges facing young people, and I want the best for her. And I hope that one day in the distant future, I might be able to leave her something to help her. So I share that motivation. But I also believe passionately that it's in her best interests to live in a just society, one where everyone's child has a fair chance, a more similar chance of doing well in life. As I said earlier, we could double inheritance tax, and that would still leave the majority of people with the ability to leave their wealth to their families. But I believe it would also create a fairer society for the benefit of everyone's sons and daughters.